Well, hello. Welcome to Oh Say Can You See, which is live here in Holland on the second Wednesday of every month. We also do this show in Grand Rapids. Tonight, we're hoping for a lot of telephone calls. This is our mid-season review, halfway through our fourth season here, and this happens to be our 100th show of this Oh Say Can You See television program, which is brought to you by the Society for Economic Equality. With me tonight is one panelist other than myself, and that's Stephan Durst, who is right there, yeah. Stephan Durst, who's been with the Society for about as long as I have, and this is as small as these shows ever get. So we're really hoping for some telephone calls. We're going to be seeing parts of some old shows right now, and most of these shows, or it seems if there has to be a theme that one reaches for in this season so far, it's probably the capitalist mythology series that was done by John Crisman as the moderator of those. We had Capitalist Mythology 101. We had Capitalist Mythology 101 Part 2. We had more Capitalist Mythology and more Capitalist Mythology Part 2. And we're going to see a couple of those episodes. And most of the show, we're really going to be very open for a show that you're ever going to see us do. And we're hoping that you call in. Here in Holland, we always get our best, most sympathetic and interesting calls. Also, we get a minority of our nastiest and crankiest calls as well from here in Holland.
Well, surely not as bad as some we were getting in Grand Rapids when we started.
In the early days. Yeah.
Where we were told to get ass insurance and watch our backs and that.
Over the phone, yeah. Well, in order to really get into this show, which is hopefully a review of some of these previous episodes, we're going to go right into the first of these roll-ins. And this is from actually a show we did here in Holland on August 12th of just this previous year. And if we can roll that at any time, the title of that is Capitalist Mythology 101 Part 2, and you're going to see about 5.5 minutes of it. And we'll be open to your calls as soon as we come back, so if you develop any questions while you're watching this, call right in and we'll get right into your calls. So, anytime. Whoop.
We're back.
We're back. But will we be able to just feel, oh, yeah, that looks like it.
Grab it away from Indians, but
Yeah.
there was a place there was, for white Americans, white people in the United States, there was some place you could go and become independent economically. You didn't have to go and find a job. You didn't have to find an employer. If you were successful as a farmer or whatever, being successful meant being able to feed your family by the sweat of your own brow. Now we live in a rather different world. First of all, you can't feed your family if you can't find somebody who will hire you for a job. And if jobs are scarce, or if you are unable to get a job that pays well, then you're very likely to end up in poverty. And poverty, unfortunately, the feelings about it still date back to 250 years ago. If you're poor, it's because you didn't work hard enough, you see? But you see, that's not the way it is anymore. You're poor because you can't get a job because of unemployment, or because you haven't been able to pick up the skills that are necessary. Or, very important, you didn't have the pull, the influence, that sort of thing that enables people to get jobs. So I think that that's one aspect of capitalist mythology, that people are poor because they're lazy or don't work hard enough or whatever. I think that's one thing that's one of the myths, I think, that we might very well consider.
And that's also tied to the specifically Republican myth that the poor people are doing better than, say, someone who's working, that the poor are getting so many government benefits in this country that it pays not to work. Now, we know the working poor are having a very hard time, and we should thank Reagan for pushing for the earned income tax credit so that working families can get a break at least on their taxes. But this pernicious idea remains that the poor get so many government benefits that it doesn't pay to work in this country. Well, it hardly pays to work in this country because of the wages that one gets, but I don't see any benefits for certainly able-bodied, the unemployed in this country as compared to the European countries. The French, for instance, have a much stronger safety net, and so do the Germans, and their capitalists are trying to follow the American model, which is force people to work for low wages or die without benefits.
I think that will come, certainly, and it's heading that way in the advanced Western so-called democracies.
You were saying, that the poor, the reason they're poor is that they don't have jobs. That is true to an extent, but more true than that is people are poor with their jobs these days.
Well said. I should have included that.
We talking about myths. In the 90s, we've been hearing about how great the economy is, how wonderful, that so many jobs have been created, that the unemployment level is, at a relatively low level and all of that. But the reason that the unemployment level is low is that conditions finally came into being or were brought into being by the powers that be that led to the extremely productive American job. This extreme productivity that we see in the American economy these days means that people are working their butts off for really low wages, lower than before, working much harder than before, and that's doesn't really seem like a sustainable situation, but it really is something that Wall Street absolutely goes gaga over. If someone fires half their workforce and makes the remaining half work twice as hard, which is an actual formula by someone named Charles Handy that's quite popular in the business world these days, then you've created productivity, but you've also unleashed people into the labor market who are going to be grabbing what they can, and what they can get are some more of these of the same sort of thing. The hard job paying very little, and that's what the supposed boom is built upon, and so actually what you're seeing is a decline in the standard of living. The U.S. standard of living has declined since 1973, and well, hey, welcome back to the live portion of this show. You just saw a clip from a show we did just a few months ago, August 12th, here in the Holland studio. Capitalist Mythology 101 Part 2. And a couple of the same characters that you saw there are here tonight, live in Holland. This is This is January 13th, is it?
Yes.
Well, January 13th, and you can call in. Phone lines are open right now, and you can call in and comment on what you've just seen and what you will see, further clips. And Stephen, do you have any comments to make on statements made by any of the panelists up to this point?
No, I think they speak for themselves.
the big financial news right now is Brazil's devaluing its currency, the real, by what, 15 or 20%. This is bad news for the global economy. Another major setback was Brazil's the 19th largest economy in the world, and Wall Street was hoping that they would be able to maintain the value of their currency by keeping their interest rates high. But it was devastating their own markets, and they couldn't export because their currency was overvalued. So we'll see what happens next. The global economy, I don't think, is turning out to be the great cure for all the world's ills that we were told when NAFTA was passed a few years ago.
Yeah, well, to relate to the clip, I would just say that the global economy thing is something to look at in terms of, things just really aren't what they, have apparently been cracked up to be for quite a few months, or, maybe even a couple of years. We went from a time when people were quite concerned about what was going on in terms of, downsizing, which continued all along, and in terms of, corporate layoffs, loss of benefits, which have continued all along. But at some point, 18 months to 2 years ago, we got such an extreme steady drumbeat of, how it is that, times have never been better, that it just all became quite suspicious, and it's quite suspicious now. I mean, it's a year and a half since the great Asian economic meltdown began, and, somehow we've had the impression here in the United States, our media has had the impression here in the United States that that's not going to affect the economy of the United States. The meltdown itself, I would say, has something to do with some of the inappropriate mythology involved, in that somehow the whole sort of Reagan era mythos that began to sort of hover over the Republican Party and the extreme right, and then eventually kind of encompassed all of American society, or most of the mainstream media, the myth that proposed that all we needed to do was to get government off the backs of corporations and to throw people off of welfare, and that everything would be really hunky-dory with the economy. But, in reality, applying that to the rest of the world, this so-called structural readjustment to places like Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, and, now to, just to begin with, has created a cascading failure in the world economy, most notably after East Asia in Russia, whose virtual economy, its house of cards, came down, and immediately after that happened in the biggest way, since it, began to collapse years ago. And then when they declared this extreme collapse, this past fall, at that point they were saying that Latin America was going to go next. And perhaps that's what we're seeing.
Yes, that seems to be what we're seeing. Of course, it was a myth all along, the idea of getting the government off the backs of the people, meaning the corporations, meaning the CEOs, because Reagan was obviously supporting them a great deal with his weapons buildup. And we see even in East Asia and in the bailout in Mexico before, Wall Street, the speculators, created these huge bubbles, and then when the bubbles burst, they were bailed out by the IMF and by the U.S. Treasury, and the peoples of those countries were forced to endure great hardships, so-called austerity measures, to make sure that the that the money that was being sunk into the investment community would be coming back, but only through the exploitation of the masses of those people.
We seem to have I think what's most significant about the economy itself, just considered as an economy, is that in the United States, especially, and in the rest of the world progressively, it's a speculative economy. I think it's been said that half of all the wealth that's been created in the past several years, or at least an extreme proportion of it, has been created in paper only. It's not really suggesting that that there's more actual production of goods going on. But there's more investment and more maneuvering for the future potentialities of an economy, and this is perhaps causing a lot of the sort of extreme ups and downs in stock markets and world exchanges that we're beginning to see.
Last year we did a program on the gross national product, the gross domestic product, as being an indicator that does not permit us to subtract economic activities that are actually detrimental to people or to the economy or to the environment. So there's another myth on capitalism that one good is as good as another. If you make a bunch of Barbie dolls, it's the same as producing enough for everybody to eat, or having medical supplies. That's a myth I'd challenge our viewers to consider. I mean, when you're listening to the economic news and it said, well, the GDP went up, what does that really mean? We have a little anti-commercial that we show often that points out that every time there's a divorce, the GDP goes up, because now there are two households and they have to have their two cars and their two sets of plates and their two TVs, plus the lawyer got a big cut. Or every time somebody gets cancer, the GDP goes up, more economic activity. But the question is the economic activity sustainable? Is it socially responsible?
Yeah, you can have economic activity that just, where, say, an extremely poor part of the country like Mississippi legalizes casino gambling, and the Mississippi Delta ends up with 5 major casinos, and a bunch of people come in and they go to these casino complexes to gamble, but the people in the complex, in the malls of the shopping areas of the complex, and the restaurants, are locals who are making very small wages. The money goes into the casino, and then it goes out of the state.
Into a Swiss bank account.
Well, so, you have a supposed benefit in that the GDP, or whatever we can call it, the economic activity in terms of dollars goes up in the area, but it doesn't necessarily benefit the area per se. Atlantic City saw a lot of that in the past, however long it's been, 29, 30 years since gambling was legalized in Atlantic City. It hasn't become an affluent spot on the East Coast.
If I'd been told 15 years ago that the state was going to be supporting itself largely through gambling, I wouldn't have believed it, but here we are, folks, the state of American politics.
Yeah, well, before we go into this next roll-in, I think that this is probably the most crucial thing that we really talk about in terms of a picture of the economy, and that picture being that it's not as real as it looks, and that there's a big, as they say in the media these days, a disconnect between the reality of the way most people are experiencing the economy and the hype and the spin that the media is giving the type of economy that we've gained. Mm-hmm. The investment-oriented economy, the economy that's extremely speculative, the economy that ends up throwing very large numbers of people out of work in a process, a sort of a grinding mill that takes the the high-waged worker, the worker with benefits and a retirement, and turns them, after laying them off, into a temp, while all of this is something that the stock markets demand as a process in order to boost the stock price. It's not necessarily actually something that is improving the overall productive economy, but it's improving the paper economy, and that's the boom that we're really seeing. And that's the reason, well, if you consider the layoffs, if you consider the amount of downsizing, the amount of merging that's gone on, you see that there's really, in reality, a shrinkage, a rather drastic shrinkage going on in the economy. You know, every day we hear about extremely large mergers. Every day we hear about extremely large numbers of layoffs, and every day we realize in our own lives that workers who had a higher standard of living in the past are now temps with a lower standard of living. We have another roll-in.
I think we have a telephone.
Oh, we do? A call. Do we?
No call.
No?
Okay.
Well, we can go to this other roll-in, and we really do encourage your calls. As I said, we're going to have a lot of time for telephone calls between these clips, and just because you hear us talking doesn't mean that you can't converse with us about these topics yourself when we come back. And we'll be back in about another 5 minutes, and this particular roll-in is from a show we did just this past December 9th, and the title of this show was More Capitalist Mythology, Part 2, as distinct from the earlier clip you saw that was actually from Capitalist Mythology 101, Part 2. So, as you can see, we've been dealing with this topic quite a bit this season.
There are a lot of them.
And any time on that second roll-in.
I don't know, I guess I'll just throw a question out to Mark, and I guess I'll throw a question out to you guys. What do you think about capitalism?
Well, that's quite a
Broad.
yeah, quite a broad throw. You know, I would say that it's a system that definitely has worked better in the United States in previous decades than in our current couple of decades or so. And
it has sustaining more.
Well, better in that the standard of living reached a high point in 1973 and has been declining since then. And people have certain myths about capitalism and about the United States and its capitalist system that really seem to have become outmoded and really no longer seem to be applicable. You know, for instance, that the standard of living will rise, that one's children will be better off than oneself in the future.
So you don't believe in the floating boat metaphor that they usually use? I mean, during the high tide, the floating boat brings everybody up.
Well, it may be when the tide comes in that all boats float, but I think that since 1973, the reality is that the tide's been going out and it hasn't been coming back in. It's a system, you know, based on a certain amount of exploitation and built-in inequalities that Americans were willing to put up with that as long as overall the tide was going up. And I think the biggest myth of capitalism, the idea for this show, as I understood it, being the myths of capitalism or more myths of capitalism, and this being part 2 of a show that we did in Holland, which itself was a reprise of an earlier couple shows that we did on that topic. And I think the thing that I think that we've never really touched upon, actually that's probably an understatement in itself, we've touched upon this, but I would like to emphasize that the standard of living has been falling, and that the media has been telling us that we're living in the most prosperous times in the history of our country, and it's telling us that the economy is really booming and fantastic. And for the upper 20% of the population, that's been true. For the lower 80% of the population, that's been less and less true in this past quarter century.
Sure.
And well, for instance, instance, if we're living in such great times, why all the mergers that are taking place that we hear about every day now, huge mergers, the largest corporations in existence in the last 50, 60 years are now joining together and forming corporations that really don't represent the combined corporations. They represent, where you had two corporations, you end up with one corporation that gets rid of about, half of its workers. And this is happening over and over again, and happening every day, and people pretty much ignore that, and they don't see that as a contraction in the economy, which, in fact, I think we really should be discussing it as a contraction, as a deflation. And we have a rolling that was taken from CNN, dollars and cents from headline news, on December 2nd, just this past December 2nd. And on that day, the layoffs were big news, but only because Boeing announced 22,000 layoffs on top of 28,000 that they had announced a couple months ago. And because of that, they were that day looking at the layoffs that were news that day, and it became news that day, but a day later, or 2 days later, it was no longer news. So if we could have that rolling, you'll see what we mean. I mean, the question is this a booming economy? Is this the best that our country has ever seen? If this is what we're seeing, even with Kellogg's, Johnson & Johnson.
Even Amway is laying off.
Even Amway. There was
Okay, anytime. Well, hey, welcome back to the live portion of this Oh Say Can You See show here in Holland. As you can see, it actually is. Right now, it's January 13th, and you can call in, and we encourage you to call in. There are no bad calls, really, unless you start swearing at us, and that's certainly frowned upon. But we're looking for calls here, and I'm speaking with Stephan Durst, who's off camera in that direction, and we've been talking about some shows that we've done, and you've just seen the second clip from one of these shows, and these shows focused on the disconnection between the mythology of our economy and the reality of the economy, the way it's really experienced by most people. And having gone through all of these clips and the discussion so far, I think we can ask the question, and Stephen's already ready to answer that question. The question is, to use a loaded term, do we have a class war going on in the United States, in this economy, and in this polity? John Crisman, who actually was the associate producer responsible for the content of these shows, would begin his moderating pieces by declaring that, well, we could sit here and use a lot of loaded terms like, class warfare and, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and, this might correspond to, radicals, bearded radicals in greatcoats standing on soapboxes, the sort of left-wing stereotypes that allow, because of our conditioning, people to just sort of disconnect from these realities that may lie behind, some negative aspects to capitalism. Anyway, Stephen, do we have a class war, to use that loaded term?
Well, certainly the class war is being waged on many fronts, not just on the propaganda front, the so-called education front, the media front that we've been discussing so far. The U.S. has more people in prison than any other country in the world, and many of these per population, and now those people are being put to work to lower the wages of the people who are outside. who are free. The free people are being condemned to poverty and unemployment, and more of the underclass are being imprisoned. As Jeffrey Ryman put it, the rich get richer and the poor get prison. Now, if this isn't class war, what is? The moving of jobs overseas, the placing of toxic waste in poor ethnic neighborhoods. If this isn't class war, what is? It's always the elites who, the minute anybody criticizes any of their policies, begins talking about the rhetoric of class war, but though they don't like to talk about it, indeed the political and the financial elites in the global economy are waging a worldwide class war, in my opinion. I'd like to know what our viewers think. They'd call in and we'd have a chance to ask them.
Yeah.
The middle class is disappearing.
Wall Street applauds when wages are cut, when people are downsized, and a corporation takes on temporary workers. Wall Street applauds when mergers take place that actually are going to result in more shedding of workers. Wall Street loves it when a corporation, a corporate CEO, decides that lean and mean is the way to go, like with what happened with Sunbeam and its CEO, who actually brought the corporation down to just 3 manufacturing plants, down from 16 in the U.S. The internationalization of the economy, actually the employment of third world labor to make the products that American corporations used to make in the United States. I mean, isn't that class war? Because the whole reason for the globalization of the economy is to get around the American worker, who used to be an affluent worker with benefits. I'm not to say that there aren't affluent workers today, but the trend is downward. Even for the upper 20%, that upper tier, people like Jeremy Rifkin, economist Jeremy Rifkin, will tell you that the people at the lower end of that upper tier are perpetually falling into the lower tier part of the economy.
Well, certainly Wall Street applauds when public assets are privatized for pennies on the dollar. That too, to me, would seem to be part of the class war. The erosion of democratic institutions entirely. After all, the same segment of the society that so enjoyed Reagan's tenure in office are the ones who most want to see Clinton removed. Now, anyone who's watched this show knows that there aren't many defenders of Clinton here, but the fact remains that we have so much, so many distractions going on that I suspect that these are part of the class war too.
Good point.
Why is democracy in retreat when we have the technological capabilities to continue to expand the areas in which the public can actually control their own destinies? I mean,
Yeah,
we'd like to have some callers. What do you think democracy really means? Can you have democracy without having actual democratic control of the means of production?
well, that's the reason for campaign finance reform, but that's probably also the reason that it perpetually fails. Most people in the United States want to see campaign finance reform, but it's not going to take place, and in fact, more and more money goes into these campaign coffers from very wealthy individuals and corporations who've gotten around the campaign finance laws that came into effect after bad old Nixon and all the nasty evil stuff he was doing, trying to steal the the national elections.
Not just campaign finance reform, but we see a lot of things that people really, really want that won't happen because they're not in the interest of that 20%, actually, perhaps even smaller, that's actually running the
We have a call.
political state through the control of the economy.
We have a caller, Robin. Hey, thanks for calling in. Your question or comment, let's hear it. Robin?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
I know that there's not a lot of defenders of Clinton there, but wouldn't you say that one's almost as bad as the other, and it's an incredible waste of money to go through the whole hearings?
I think so.
Yes, absolutely. But we were just saying that the entire wealth of the state and of the people is being wasted by the political elites for their own ends, and one of those ends is to keep everybody constantly distracted from the facts of our situation. And as we see the facts of our situation, our chances of having a truly, how would you say, good society are eroding.
If I could answer, I'd say that I think also that the distraction aspect is quite amazing. There are a couple of Republicans in the House. One's named Doolittle, the other one's Delay, and Delay was told, well, isn't it kind of awful that not much has gone on in the last session, in the last Congress, and because of the presidential scandal and all of that. And he said, well, people were trying to push through campaign finance reform, and that would have been bad for the Republican Party, and so that nothing happened there. He said, well, I think that's good. And he said, well, I think it's good that nothing happened on tobacco. He said, well, that's good. And he said, well, so anyway, he was proud of the fact that they had delayed, and he was certainly, I'm sure he was not alone, but he was probably very, very much unusual in the boldness of how he would say that. And in terms of Clinton and his scandal and it not being, well,
Robin, what would you like to see our political leaders doing right now?
Something besides what they're doing?
Yeah.
Working?
Yeah. He's not going to be thrown out of office.
No.
And
they should have, I don't know.
I do think that we have another caller, Lex. If you can just hang on the line, we'll
No, Mark, no.
I'm just saying, what?
There's no other caller on the line.
Oh, I'm
You're
sorry.
confused.
This was a message that said, let the caller talk. So they're encouraging me to let you say something. So.
Oh, no. I'm all for censure, but impeaching him on the basis of him lying. I mean, if you had to impeach every president that lied, we wouldn't have had any.
Absolutely.
I mean, give me a break.
There are things that I think Clinton may have done that I've read about. There's the Mina airport scandal. There are some things there that probably you could get to if Starr had actually dove down deeply into Whitewater and into the Rose Law Firm, but he wasn't going to do that because Republicans are as involved with all of that as Clinton, I'm sure. So there's a certain amount of hypocrisy going on there. What I don't understand is if you look at Clinton and what he's actually done, he's done a lot of privatization. He did extreme welfare reform, maybe not as extreme as the Republicans would have, but a lot of things that have actually, like NAFTA, that have impacted working people, rather adversely, he's been in favor of, despite, his original election stances. And it just seems to be a situation where it's hard to imagine why the Republicans are so against this guy. And I think it's irrational reasons, and I think that the media also, as Stephen suggested, has to come up with something to distract people from some real political issues, some real fundamental and far-reaching changes are taking place in our economy in the last several years, and never more so than right now. And people should realize that that maybe the people who are the well-off people who control the media, maybe they have an agenda when they give us nothing but O.J. Simpson for a year or 2 years, and then they give us Monica Lewinsky for a year or 2 years, and we've had several things like that in between there. And it just, you know, are we serious adults, you know, in this society, or are we just children who, you know, watch the flickering lights and kind of lose our minds about the important issues?
Robin, how do we create a more democratic society? How do we get from where we seem to be going to where I think most people want to be, where they have power and freedom?
Less politicians. Bring some of the power back to the people and take some away. I mean, they do so little.
What about limited campaign? What about real campaign finance reform, where, say, a politician gets a certain number of signatures that allows him to participate in a national or statewide election, and then no one is allowed to have, well, then the money actually comes from the state and from the taxpayers rather than from corporations or the wealthy.
Yeah, big difference. Cut out some of those special interests.
I think that would make a big difference.
Of course, the two parties in power aren't going to permit this. The only way we're going to be able to do that is to get other parties in there specifically with that goal in mind. But hopefully this scandal will disgust people so much that we will see the two parties mutually self-destruct between now and the next election in 2000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Republicans seem to like, back to the welfare, they seem to like to have their poor. They like to have them under their thumb. That they wouldn't reform the welfare as well as the Democrats and get them working because they wouldn't have them where they wanted them. Democrats seem to be a little bit more up with the people, you know, a little.
A little, but not enough.
I'm not, right, I don't favor either one, but...
Yeah, I think that's quite true about the Republicans. The Republicans liking their poor to be quite poor, because the poor, by being poor, put a lot of pressure, a lot of job pressure on the people who aren't so poor, but you know, you might want to keep them in line and make them fearful about the possibility of losing their jobs. Also, it's a good politics of division sort of issue to make the lower classes kind of despise one another, to make the not so well off despise the poor, and the poorer to be despised, you know, by the people who are a little bit better off than themselves. It seems to me that something of that's been going on in our society for a while. You know, our politics gets nastier towards the poor as overall, you know, since '73, when in these 30 years or so, you know, when the standard of living fell in the United States, these are the same years in which our politics towards the poor became nastier. People, you know, they have a tax burden that they can see, you know, goes to supporting some people who are not as well off as themselves, and that, even though that's a small part of their tax burden, that's the part that the right-wing politicians get them really hopping mad about when things aren't really going so well for them.
Divide and conquer, it's an old tactic. We should thank Robin for a call and open the lines for any other callers out there. You had some good things to say, Robin. We hope you will call again.
Yep.
Thanks, Robin. Bye.
So Clinton's raising the military budget. In a way, the military budget is the largest welfare program in the world. Not only does it employ a lot of the underclass, but it certainly puts a lot of money into the pockets of huge corrupt corporations. Who's Lockheed Martin, right? They're the ones who also are going to go into welfare reform.
No, privatized welfare reform.
Yeah, privatized welfare.
We have a caller, Todd. You're on the line. Hello.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, question, comment, Todd?
Yeah, I just want to know what do you think about all this Bill Clinton stuff?
I think we already answered that, Todd. What do you think?
Oh, I just tuned in. I don't know. What are you guys talking about?
We're talking about the possibility of having an actual democracy in this country. What are you talking about?
I don't know. Who are you?
Well, Todd,
I think it's a serious call.
we're going to say goodbye to you, Todd, and we're going to go to our final roll-in here, and we'll be back for about 1 or 2 minutes after that for some quick call from someone, so we can have that final roll-in any time now. Hedrick Smith, Surviving the Bottom Line, Part 2, Living on the Fault Line.
It was founded by a bunch of college buddies, most of them computer and video arts majors at the University of California in San Diego.
We were a garage band, multimedia company. That's really what we were. We rented a big house. It was a 4-bedroom house out in the local San Diego suburb, and we just piled all the computers in.
There was a phone call to mom and dad saying, I'm not going to be earning any money for this year. This is my rent payment. This is how much I eat, and I'm not going to do anything else, so will you let me borrow, $10,000 to live this year?
We weren't married. No one had kids. No one had a mortgage to pay for. It didn't matter if we went broke, so we were willing to bet it all.
In 1992, Michel Kripalani and his friends took a prototype of their video game to a computer expo called Macworld, and suddenly they were a hit. It's a $2 million a year company. Most of its founders
Oh, well, that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense at this point because we've cut it short in order to take your call, so I hope you appreciate that.
If the calls are coming in.
And caller, your question or comment.
Who is the caller?
Caller, are you there?
Yes, I
am. You have a question or comment?
Yes, you were talking about President Clinton and all this nonsense about impeachment and everything else. Whatever happened to for the people and by the people, which means we voted him in. Why don't we have a say in getting him out or what's going to happen to him instead of wasting all these millions of dollars on this?
Well, because we don't have a direct democracy. We have a representative democracy, but the representatives don't represent us. They represent the people who got them there, who would be their the large corporate donors. They represent a class interest, and that class is actually a small percentage of the American population. And that's why we have this big circus.
But the thing is, the American people should have some kind of say because basically we voted in all the politicians, we voted in Clinton. And it's a waste of time and a waste of money. And by the time it's all said and done, if he goes to trial, he's still going to be president all the way through.
Yeah.
You're making our point exactly. Why can't the American people have it the way they want? Because there are powerful interests here that need to distract us from the facts of our situation, which is that our standard of living is going down while the wealth of the world is going into the bank accounts of a few global elites. This global economy is our enemy, and they're waging war on us as a people and on the institutions of democracy. And if we don't wake up and do something about it, it's not just Clinton who's going to be in trouble.
Well, yeah, that's true. Well, the other thing that, as far as the economy goes, the average working person nowadays, there's not such a thing called job security. Because you have everybody that has manpower people that are temps.
Yeah.
I've heard this from so many people that if they're there for a year, they have to hire them in. 364 days, they're laid off. Or terminated. 2 days later, they're back doing the same job. And this is ridiculous. That's why the economy for the working person is going down the tubes.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. That's why, even though, the media, which is, controlled by the influential and the better off, people economically, that's why they'll tell you that this is the best time of all times because the stock market is doing extremely well. But it's not, as you know, And as I've read quite a bit over these past couple of years, that doesn't at all mean that most people's standard of living has kept up since 1973. It's really had a fairly significant decline, and it's even more significant when you realize that per capita wage earning in the United States has fallen quite a bit, and that statistics that are used in the media very often are deceptive because they'll tell you how how the average household is doing. But in that average household, both the husband and wife are working, and maybe the kids are too, and they're just trying to, pay the rent, and they're not taking vacation anymore, and maybe they're temps, and they're not even given vacation or benefits or retirement anymore. So, I mean, this is the. If there's any point that we really try and make is that the media serves a big distraction function these days, and it's pretty evident when you look at what's going on with Clinton. It seems quite possible that that's part of what's going on and why the media has been so much involved in the whole process. I think it's ridiculous. O.J. Simpson, concentrating on O.J. Simpson for 2 years, that was absurd too. We were discussing the possibility of national health care at the time, and that went down the tubes because there was sort of a sleight of hand, now you see it, now you don't,
Well,
the
it's
issue
more
became
complicated.
O.J. Simpson.
It's more complicated than that. But I think the caller really put his finger on one of the big things. Prison labor is another force driving down wages.
Privatized prisons.
Third world sweatshops and child labor are another thing. But as I asked our former callers, I'd like to know what the caller thinks we should or could do about it.
Yeah, but how do you change it? This is a process that's been going on since basically the late 70s.
Yeah, well, early 70s even, yeah. I think campaign finance reform is something that really has to take place, or the development of alternative parties. If that doesn't happen, how is any of this going to change unless things get a whole lot worse before they can possibly get better?
Yeah, I understand that, but the process of changing, basically you have big corporations that are putting people into politics that they want. You can say they're basically politicians are bought or whatever to a point, but it seems like people that have the money can run for the office because they have people backing them. The average person cannot afford to run for an office.
And that's because it's part of the class war. I mean, most politicians are either of that 1 or top 10%, or else they work for them.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. So how can, say, a person that makes $50,000 a year, how can he compete with somebody that's making $200,000 a year and has the financial backing of other people?
Well, if working people start talking and organizing and make clear that that what they want is more democracy and more power and less bullshit from their elected leaders, then we'll get it. But if we don't, if we keep ourselves glued to the next O.J. Simpson trial, we'll find ourselves in a situation that we won't be able to get out of. We are definitely in crisis, and the crisis isn't what happened below Clinton's waist. It's what's happening in our workplaces.
It's what's happening behind, yeah.
The average person, if I went in front of a grand jury and basically I told quite not the truth.
Yeah.
And the average person would be charged with perjury, especially, because the president is president. He has the same rights. He has to follow the same guidelines as you or I.
Yeah, well, on that point, and on that note, I guess I'd have to just say, before thanking you for your call and saying goodbye, that I think there's more to that perjury thing than there appears. I think that a person can be, well, when the judge says to the attorney, well, define sex for the president, and he defines it, and it leaves out oral sex, then the president goes, whoopee, I can mislead the people by saying, no, I didn't have sex according to that definition. And then, you know, the rest sort of becomes history. I think it was a perjury trap, and he was sort of trapped into this, and it became the distraction and the circus that it's become since then.
Well, sex is sex, regardless of it's oral or whatever.
Yeah, but see,
He had it.
yeah, but he was a lawyer, and he said, well, give me a definition. And they gave him the definition, and I think that they left out oral sex on purpose so that they could trap him, and all the rest of this could happen. And hey, we thank you for your call.
But of course,
we've got to go.
Of course, we know Clinton's a liar. He's been lying all along. He lied when he ran for president. He said he was against NAFTA. As soon as he got into office, he was all for NAFTA.
Well, we unfortunately we won't be able to take any further calls. I hear another call, but it's too bad. This has been Oh Say Can You See?
Let's take the call.
Oh,
we've
well,
got a few seconds.
How much time do we have? We've got
a minute and a half.
Okay, caller. Caller, your question or comment? Hey, I don't hear a caller.
Oh, I guess there's no call.
We've
This is their call.
Hey, caller. Well, we
hear a cough. We have a cougher.
No caller.
There's a cougher on the
Well, hey, no time for stage fright. This has been Oh Say Can You See, and we'll be back here next month, next Wednesday, next month, second Wednesday, and we thank you for your calls, and so long.
Well,
Goodbye.
Clinton's definitely the kind of politician we need less of.
Yeah. I think that you're right when you say that people need to, in order to do something about this, the only way to do something about it is for people to